thank you very much for watching our video. So a few more things we need to say to touch on this. I feel like it ends really abruptly with the least fortunate part of the day, which is Ari throwing that rock at Anthony. The local newspaper, the Record Eagle, has informed us that he's going to be prosecuted. They're trying to prosecute him for carrying an explosive device and a weapon of some sort. I believe the explosive device he was carrying, however, was isopropyl alcohol. So I know they're really trying to throw the book at him.
So I went to school with Ari, and he always seemed like a quiet, kind of sheltered kid. Didn't talk much. And then once I saw him after high school, I noticed he was a little bit more of a
The Grand Traverse County prosecutor, Noelle Moenberg, she's the one who said that the charges against him include possession of an explosive substance, which is a 10-year felony, and carrying a dangerous weapon with unlawful intent, which is a 5-year felony. I believe that I read it somewhere, I can't find the article, but I believe what they found in his possession was isopropyl alcohol. So if they're saying he was carrying an explosive device, that's kind of a stretch. But they're also saying a backpack full of rocks was carrying a dangerous weapon as a felony. And I think that goes with his intent. He showed up to a peaceful protest. He was the only one who clearly had intentions to incite violence. And while I think it's great, they make an example of that, at the same time, they shouldn't call it what it isn't. A bottle of rubbing alcohol is not an explosive device, in my opinion. Another important distinction to make from the comments coming out of the police departments around here is, leading up to this protest, there were a lot of really nasty comments going around online. There's specifically a couple Facebook groups, Overheard in Traverse City, shout out. Overheard in Leelanau County, shout out. If you want to hear some really racist and terrible shit, go ahead and join those groups on Facebook. But we shared flyers, people were sharing information about this protest happening, and people were going on and on about how I'm locked and loaded and I'm ready to shoot these people. Like I said to the Second Amendment guys that we interviewed, we've come to find from investigations from not only the Traverse City Police Department and the Traverse County, police in general, but also the FBI, who looked into threats of violence on Facebook, that they were actually all coming from white supremacist, white nationalist groups who were both pretending to be either BLM advocates or Antifa, saying they were going to come and burn down shops and loot in our precious downtown Traverse City, or they were people who were saying things like, we're ready to shoot these protesters. And Chief O'Brien, who you just saw in the video, he's the one who apologized to Adele, right?
Yep.
One thing that gives me a little bit of confidence in him is that he's the one who came out and said, hey, look, all these threats of violence came from white supremacist, white nationalists. And that makes me believe that he's not in their pocket. He's not. It makes me think he's not one of them, to have him say publicly, look, the only talk of violence was coming from these guys. That's not something you say about your buddies. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that they released that information. We also like to say, I would like to at least say thank you to the Traverse City Police Department for how they handled the Second Amendment guys. The police department obviously worked really hard not to instigate further violence by not showing up in riot gear, and they had plainclothes officers, that were made to not make the police presence look intimidating. And no one got pepper sprayed or maced. Even Ari, I don't think they maced or pepper sprayed him.
Maybe he should have been, but
It's a good in the right.
The black population of Traverse City is only 1%, and
oh yeah,
that could be why possibly there wasn't any riot gear or any more instigations that happened.
Yeah, so it's important to distinguish the fact that although there was no violence and there was not police brutality in Traverse City, we believe strongly that directly correlates with the fact that African Americans make up less than 1% of the population of Traverse City. So the statistic is 0.7%. So less than 1% of Traverse City and the Grand Traverse area is made up of African Americans. And it's important to remember that we have privilege to be able to go out and demonstrate in our little small white town. We've been very careful not to say an all white town, but I think looking at the demographics show it is. Here, I'm gonna hand this to you. I'm gonna look at it because the actual.
It's an all-white town.
It's like 97% white. All right, we've
Cops should eat more mushrooms, too. I just want to put that out there. They should demand that all law enforcement take mushrooms.
Absolutely. Unless they have pre-existing mental health conditions, in which case they shouldn't be in law enforcement, honestly. And that's not to say that people with mental health conditions are not good people, but the amount of stress that we put these officers under, that's a great way to determine whether or not they're going to handle their shit. And
here you go. Here's a couple mushrooms. We'll talk to you in a few minutes. And
it's safer than pot, almost, mushrooms. So I agree. Yeah. Maybe we should take that to Chief O'Brien right away.
Let's bring him a bag.
Yeah. Traverse City is 94% white.
94% white.
So it makes sense that there was not the same level of aggression by the police here. Another thing that I really want to drive home with this end segment is a call to action. Like, what can people do? And I think maybe that's something you can speak to as a parent about talking with your children, because that's the one thing we heard over and over again when we were out there is talk to your kids. The change starts at home,
Yeah. No, it does. Yeah, it starts at home. It starts with children first and foremost, and then it can lead on to parents and adults talking in groups about how we can stop racism as a whole, as a family, because it is an inherited trait that you get from your parents, that's passed on from the people you're around, and there's a lot of it around here. So yeah, that's a very important subject to talk about with your children. Stop using the N-word. Jokes aren't funny about race, and they're not. And you really got to drive that home. And
Yeah, I like to say on that, there's a difference between racial jokes and racist jokes, but until we live in a society where people of color are not being killed at an exponentially higher rate, it makes sense that all of those jokes that's a touchy subject, man. And if you're making jokes about race and you are not putting in the effort to abolish the systemic racism that's occurring in our country, then you're all problem and no solution, and when I say there are racial jokes and racist jokes, something about sketches like like David Chappelle made. This shit's fucking funny, where you can comment on how people are different. While we're all the same fundamentally in the fact that we are all human beings, there are cultural differences, and that's part of what makes humanity so awesome, and it's also why it's bullshit when people say I don't see color. Not that color necessarily correlates to culture either. I strongly believe that you could raise a person of any color in a specific household and they'll grow up the same as their brother and sisters. You could take a baby from any part of the world, raise them in your home, and there's not going to be some inherent behavioral trait towards violence or aggression or, all this stuff that gets pushed down through government and racist propaganda over the years that we still see today. The things that make people afraid of black men in our country.
Yeah, it hasn't gone away. If anything on the news, it's even worse, because the media is so prevalent in all of our lives, and everybody's watching the news, and the more posts you see on social media that pushes that racism towards people, the more you're going to see it in society,
Absolutely. And I really liked what Demaray had to say about being careful about what you share on social media, because we need to acknowledge that, man, there are literally people getting paid to make fake profiles on the internet, to pretend to be Americans, to argue with each other and you, to divide us and to instill hatred. That's a very real thing. And I know everyone likes to think, oh, that only happens to the people on the other side of the aisle. But that's not true. It happens to both of us. The paid trolls on the internet and the unpaid trolls on the internet, they specifically play both sides of the aisle. So we all need to look at the responsibility we have using social media to ask, why did this person make this post? Who made this post? What was their intention? And what do I think people are going to take from it? Because sometimes you share something because you have a certain intention. You know, you're like, oh, this is going to express this idea of mine. But you know in the back of your head, very consciously, oh, but there are other people out there that are going to take it in this other way. You know, so maybe you think about that before you share it. Is it really that important to, you know, jack off by sharing this meme to push in other people's faces? You know, and yeah, don't jack off on other people without their consent, right?
No, always get consent first.
For real, I mean, more people than you'd be surprised how many people will give you consent to let you jack off on them. That's a little social experiment we're doing in an upcoming video. And you're gonna like it. It's gonna honestly, it's gonna blow your mind. So you better stay tuned for the...
Might even blow your load.
Yeah, but just ask first. Okay, it's very important, always the most important thing. Just ask first.
Stop the hate, spread the love, stop racism, Black Lives Matter, police reform today.
That's right, police reform today. Demand accountability and demand proper training for the police. What is it? It's like 1,500 hours. How many hours? 150 hours of something crazy for being a hairdresser in Michigan. And it's like
1,000 hours, I think.
Let me look it up real quick though. I wanna have the numbers here. Okay, so the numbers are, you have to do 1,500 hours of training to be a cosmetologist, style hair and whatnot in the state of Michigan. But to be a police officer and to actually hit the street, you only have to do 594 hours of training, which is almost 1/3 of the time. And that blows my mind because cosmetologists don't get guns.
No, they get really sharp shears. You better look out.
That's true. You could do a Sweeney Todd, but you only got so much range. Like you can't Sweeney Todd someone who's running away from you.
That's true, unless you have a good throwing technique.
And they don't get handcuffs either, or tasers, or, you know what, man? I don't
know. I dated a salon manager once, and she had handcuffs and taser.
Were they issued from the company?
No, they just kind of sat in her drawer.
Well, maybe, just to get ahead of the opposition, because I know what the people on the other side of the aisle are going to say. So let's go ahead and mandate that hairdressers get guns.
They put in the hours for it, Put in 1,500 hours.
For real, man. Handcuffs for sure. Though nothing would make me feel more secure about getting my hair cut, which I haven't had done in over 10 years, than being handcuffed first.
They should actually give cops scissors and take away their guns and give hairstylists pistols.
That's a great idea. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you so much again for watching this video. I know it's very long. There's a lot to pack in here. This is all really important stuff, and I hope that we've been able to elicit at least one laugh out of the whole thing. But this isn't a funny subject, and that's why I'd like to leave you with this. Why did the Scarecrow get promoted?
Why?
Well, if you knew the guy, it would make sense. I mean, because for real, the Scarecrow, he was outstanding in his field. Oh.